Bank chief economist for Africa, Shantayan Devarajan, recently wrote that sub-Saharan Africa in 2011 has unprecedented opportunity for transformation and sustained growth, and helping to ensure the right energy solutions are available to help achieve this prospect will simultaneously be good for climate protection and local development as well. So, still at the threshold of a renewable energy revolution, what are some of the challenges this environment presents? What are some of the opportunities for investors? That's just some of what we'll be delving into over the next hour. And to help me do just that, Rohitesh Darwin, who's a resource economist at KPMG, and Rensha Fantonda, head of the Green Industry Strategic Business Unit at the IDC, are with me here at KPMG headquarters. While joining our discussion from our studios in Nairobi, Kenya, is Bernard Osawa. He's Director of Renewable Energy at the Energy Regulatory Commission over in Kenya. So welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining our conversation this morning. Rohitesh, let's start off with you, because back in February, the lack of mention of the climate change agenda in President Zuma's State of the Nation address really triggered a wave of debate, concern most of all about the commitment that South Africa has to hosting COP17 come November this year. Just how high on the African agenda does climate change rank?
Good morning, Alishia, and good morning to your viewers. I think climate change is a critical component of our development strategy in Africa, and it's useful to think of it in three ways. Firstly, climate is particularly vulnerable for Africa. We know that in Africa, the northern and southern parts are going to get significantly hotter and drier, and we face significant vulnerabilities. So as a continent, we need to understand how do we help our communities and how do we help our economies adapt to that change. The second component is mitigation. It's fundamental to recognize that Africa contributes very little to global greenhouse gas emissions. With 15% of global population, we only have 5% of primary energy use. But yet, to think of mitigation as a sideline would be to miss an opportunity to mainstream sustainable development within our activities. And the third agenda for the development of Africa relates to sustainable development. How do we ensure that we put in place today infrastructure and investments that will last us for the next 40 or 50 years when we see the effects of climate change come to the fore?
Of course, all of that, Rensha, very pertinent, where we've got debate around whether developing nations should be held to the same level of scrutiny as developed nations around the world, where employing clean energies now could possibly impede our own industrialization. Your view on that?
Thank you, Alishia. I think it's very important to note that, although we a country that are still developing, that we have to become more competitive. And one of the things that we see that's very, very evident is in terms of industrialization, companies are becoming more sensitive to climate change. It's not more a factor of good citizenship and corporateship. It's more than that. It's an investment decision to support competitiveness in a long-term sustainable way that you are more profitable as well.
It's not cheap, though, getting into renewable energy, where coal is cheap for now, at least. So just how viable a road are we looking at now, looking at the economic cycle the continent is at this stage? Or do we just cut to the chase and say this is not about price, it's about climate change, and that the bottom line, that is why we need to be venturing down this road?
It is important to note that renewable energy is expensive. However, I think it's sometimes to take small steps first and then to try and develop an industry from almost a zero base, where we see that a number of companies, especially the commercial companies as well as the commercial banks, are ready to fund this industry. Although it's expensive, we can find ways to make it more profitable, find ways to fund it. But the main key for us is to ensure that we start in small steps, where you do not have a significant funding need in year 1 or 2, but build it up over a period of time to be able to build a significant sustainable industry.
Bernard, let's bring you into the conversation at this point, because we've got the Climate Change Conference, COP17, taking place at the end of this year in South Africa, and it's set to present an opportunity to advance climate protection goals specifically, and to do it synergistically with local agenda of sustainable development and then poverty alleviation as well. Is there enough buy-in for a developmental agenda like this?
Yes, the buy-in is there. I think it's the mechanism of making it happen. That's what needs to be streamlined. And that involves the sort of investment that the financiers are looking at. So the buy-in is there. I think what we have to move from is from financial feasibility to bankability of projects that financiers would like to look at.
Well, being seen as, one remedy to achieve buy-in on most levels is local success, and actually demonstrating, case studies of where renewable energy has worked, how it has worked. What are some of the benefits Kenya's reaped going down this route?
Yes, I mean, Kenya is largely renewable, and our grid and the plan that the regulator has put in place is to get at least 50% of the electricity generation, which is used by industry, to come from renewables. Most of the off-grid energy supply is renewable, but I think what we need to look at is to get. Sorry, can I hear you again?
Yes, continue.
Yeah. What I'm saying is the buy-in is there. We have some success cases. Kenya is moving more to generating its electricity from geothermal. We are moving from thermal-based, and most of the hydro, which has become unreliable based on climate variability. The buy-in is there. The government has put in place structures, and we have investors who are really interested and are putting in their money.
Well, certainly, Ritesh, the role of energy efficiency can't be denied, where Africa has the highest, unmet need for cheap, reliable energy access. I mean, is clear enough demonstration being put on the table of working examples where, where the theory we're talking about right now is actually being put into action?
Alishia, you're very right. The challenge is big. We understand that we need approximately $27 billion a year to achieve clean and reliable electricity supply by 2030. And the current investment going in is about $2 billion a year. So the gap is large, and the gap needs to be filled. From personal experience, I can say that in countries in West Africa, renewable energy is already at par with fossil fuel generated energy. And I think one of the key areas where we lack in terms of bridging this mechanism is the transfer of technology. I think that is a poorly understood mechanism in international finance. It's how do we ensure that we have access to the right levels of technology to ensure that when we put investments in place, we're putting best in class, and we're making sure that we're preparing for the future. And that touches on your points of finance and how we're ensuring that we have the right incentives in place, both domestically as well as internationally, when we're managing our negotiation positions, is to ensure that Africa gets its due place on the table, to ensure that we have access to the technology that will enable us to put these investments in place.
Of course, Rencha, mechanisms are key, and that's some of what COP17 is looking to put on the table. But there seems to be a lot of mistrust around, a talk shop like this, where we had Cancun and what played out last year, Copenhagen the year before. Is the skepticism warranted around events like these, where we're looking to put, these talking points on the table?
I think, yes, it's certainly warranted, because we haven't really seen a lot happening subsequent to those events. But the most important thing is that we, as a government and as a country, communicate very clear mechanisms, very clear commitments in terms of how we want to establish this industry. And I think that is where many of the developers are to a certain extent frustrated and concerned, and also unsure in terms of where this industry is going. So very important is to create that environment where you have the confidence that the country, the government and the developers, as well as the players, including the financiers like the DFIs, are committed to establish an industry that can support this country in going through a very, very confident climate change initiative to support renewable energy.
Well, Bernard, where we're talking about clear commitments needing to be made here, amidst it all, we've had the Kenyan government put a very clear target in place, saying that 2017 is set as the deadline for the country to make advances in green energy solutions. And Kenya's gaining traction, like you've highlighted, in wind, in geothermal, solar power energy as well. And with that, we've seen a lot of development in off off-grid energy production. Just how is that being regulated, though? Because, you know, the regulatory environment here, as Rensha has highlighted, has got to be supportive.
Okay. The regulator is part of the deal, and one of our roles as a regulator that gets us involved from the beginning is the planning phase. And we've been involved in the planning. What we're doing now is facilitating in terms of the licensing requirements, which include the environmental impacts assessments, the power purchase agreement negotiations and all that, and then the licensing. And we're also working together with Treasury to ensure that the investments that come as a result of the pre-work that's already being done to develop the resource is given the right fiscal and financial support from the government side to make them happen.
What are some of the challenges you've faced going down this route from a regulatory perspective and setting up policy for an environment like this?
Fortunately, the policy that was set up wasn't comprehensive, but it was very general and supportive of renewable energies. So far, there are no specific hurdles that we've got. The only hurdles we are getting are not from the regulatory side, but from the investment side, where the investors want sufficient comfort. They are asking for a lot of comfort in terms of securing their investments, and that involves largely the Treasury. So there is a lot of negotiation between the Treasury and the Ministry of Energy to ensure that the money that the investors are putting in, they are sufficiently comfortable to go ahead with their investments to make our renewable energy targets happen.
Reuters, when it comes to policy levers in South Africa, what are you making of our regulatory system specifically? Is it supportive enough? Because we've got to be looking beyond grid-based electricity, especially for those who can't afford it at this stage.
Alishia, you're right. I think there needs to be a combination of incentives. There's no one silver bullet that'll solve our energy problems. I think we're slowly getting there. There's a lot of detail that still needs to be worked out. We've seen the recent developments with the refit tariffs and the development of the power purchase agreements and how that's going to promote the first round of renewable energy procurements. I think there's a lot still to be done with off-grid. I think there is a very nice area where we can achieve the twin goals of adaptation and mitigation, of providing people with secure energy supplies that are clean, but at the same time ensuring that we give them the capacity to adapt to the future changes in climate, the increases in temperature. And I think that decentralized distribution of electricity is something that I think we'll see a lot of growth in the South African market in.
Well, it's all good that we're having these talks, are currently underway, Rensha, but I mean, many believe that the lack of clarity on policy, the lack of clarity on regulation that we're seeing right now, is a very big hurdle. And we can use an example where you've got the lack of clarity on independent power producers, for instance, and whether or not they would eventually be able to operate independently as opposed to, being procured by the likes of an Eskom. Are we starting on the wrong footing? Because it's all good having these talks, like I say, as opposed to doing it within a very supportive environment.
Yeah, Alishia, I think it's not a straight answer. It's not an easy discussion to have around the regulatory challenges that we currently have in this country to really kickstart this industry. However, I remain positive and committed that due to some of these challenges and delays, a number of companies are looking at off-grid solutions and are actually investing as we speak in the type of projects like cogeneration, waste to energy. So it also stimulates innovative thinking, development of companies to be more efficient, to focus on energy efficiency, demand-side management. And we see that in the application and inquiries that we do get at the IDC. And a lot of these projects are easier to implement. Many companies can do a cogeneration where they can be self-sufficient. In some cases, they can generate more electricity and actually sell back to the grid. However, that is also a challenge at this point in time. But I do believe that, again, this will take off. We have to stay committed and we have to stay positive. And hopefully, sooner than later, we will have a nice environment to do this.
Well, Ritesh, we've got Rensha there, highlighting some of the impetus that the National Cogen program is giving to IPPs and bringing them into the loop as opposed to, keeping them out. But still, and I'm going to drum on here, I mean, we've got another system coming into place, the Independent System and Market Operator Bill, ISMO, and that's in draft. And, many still very skeptical. Is this going to be offering anything better?
Alishia, I think the skepticism is warranted. It's a difficult environment. It's a complex environment. The ISMO bill that you speak of is good from a corporate governance perspective. It's good in terms of the incentives that it gives for the industry and in terms of giving the right incentives to promote the renewable energy that we need in the country. If we look at our IRP plan for the next 20 years and we see that, that a significant proportion of our new capacity will come from renewable energy, so we have the policy push from that perspective. With the refit tariffs that we have now and the competitive bidding structures in place, there is incentive and there is a positive environment for project developers to start developing these projects. And depending on which estimates you read, before 2020, we should see grid parity between renewable energy and fossil fuel-based generation.
So bottom line, what role do you see IPPs playing in the new energy dispensation in South Africa?
I think IPPs will be very significant. As I mentioned before, the funding gap is significant. There are a range of issues why the public sector has not been able to meet the electricity demand in South Africa, and I think the private sector will step in. As long as the enabling environment is in place, which we are slowly getting to, I think it's a highly complex environment that we operate in, and these things take time to work their way through the system. But the positive signals are in place, as Rensha said. I think we're making good progress, and I think IPPs, we'll see once we have the first batch of renewable energy procured in the next round of refits, I think we'll see the momentum really pick up, and then the momentum will carry us through.
Of course, Rensha, this is a risk scenario that you've got to very critically look at, being a financier and a funder of projects going down this route. How are you evaluating the risk scenario at this stage from a financier's perspective?
Yeah, it's important to note that the IDC's role is really to unlock value in the economy, to develop the industrial base and to support especially emerging industries. So we do have a higher appetite than any other commercial bank to take the early risk, and that's why we prefer to get involved in the early development of a project. We normally do that through investment in a pre-feasibility or feasibility study, and during that process we would like to partner with developers and partners that are strong enough and knowledgeable on this industry. So we do take the early risk. We believe that we have to pay sometimes a lot of money to invest in these feasibility studies, but at the end of the day, if you don't have a lot of players that's prepared to take that early risk, you won't be able to unlock the value and develop an industry that can support the long-term energy supply.
So what's your comment to financiers out there, that are contemplating going down this route, but at this stage still too risk-averse to do so?
I think it's very important to see the long-term picture. You may take the early risk now, you may see or perceive that it is a high-risk investment. However, as this economy develops, as the government put the necessary structures in place and support, this industry will become less of a risk. And if you've got strong technology suppliers, strong partners, and from a strategic perspective, focus on the long-term sustainable industry, I'm sure there will be more funders coming to the fore.
Of course, the latest integrated resource plan, the refit strategy that we've still got being debated, on both sides, it's all encouraging. Like you say, it shows that we are making progress. We've got very high targets that have been set, though. I mean, 42% of all power should be produced by alternative energy sources by 2030. Just how viable is a target there? Are we setting the bar too high and setting ourselves up for failure?
I don't think so, Alishia. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released a report last month which said that with current technologies, we can meet 80% of the world's needs for energy by 2050. We have the technologies in place, we have the capacity, or we have the potential for the capacity in place. I think we need two critical factors that will help us achieve the goal. The first is aligning our national incentives in place to promote this kind of low-carbon development, and that's where the domestic policy environment plays a key role. I think the government is good in being quite rigorous in the process of procuring renewable energy, but on the second hand, we need to think about how we're going to access international mechanisms for finance, international mechanisms for technology transfer, because I think that's critical to ensuring that we're putting in place best-of-class practices in South Africa and making sure that we're transitioning into a low-carbon economy just as our competitive partners are.
Yeah. Bernard, we've got a new multi-donor program, which is part of the climate investment funds managed by the World Bank and regional development banks, currently facilitating some progress over in Kenya as well. It's scaling up renewable energy in low-income countries, and we've got Kenya amongst 6 pilot countries at this stage that will be used as subjects here, and the funding is to bring clean energy technologies to meet demand for reliable and affordable energy moving forward. What exactly are we looking at here, and what's your outlook for this project in Kenya?
Okay, in Kenya, under the CIF program, we put together 3 projects, largely looking at grid power. Geothermal was one of them. We are looking at 400 megawatts. Solar water heaters to shave the peak demand for electricity was one of them, but the option, the other reason we are looking at that is to be less carbon intensive. And the third one, we are looking at making hybrids of the isolated power grids that we have in Kenya. Kenya, being very diverse, is not covered entirely by the national grid. So we have isolated grids in more than 23 sites, and the objective is to make the contribution for those isolated grids, which at the moment is 100% thermal to at least 50% renewable, and there's plenty of sun and wind. So largely the project, the CIF approach, the SREP project, is going to go a long way in reducing the CO2 intensity of our grids, but at the same time increase access for most of the population to electricity services. And I was impressed by the South African target, but we are looking at, by 2030, having 50% of our grid power coming from renewables, which is, I think, a fair share. But overall, in terms of primary energy, I think Kenya is running at 80% renewables. Sustainability is another question that we have to look at.
Of course, sustainability is a key issue where, funding aside and continuous funding aside, we've got a host of other issues to consider as well. And Roitesh touched on it earlier on in the conversation, technology options, skill set as well. Do we have enough in-house skill and technology that's supportive of a sustainable endeavor?
Technology, yes. And I think as one of the discussants said, we are coming to grid parity soon, but there are also other technologies to look at the biomass that is widely available and can be grown. I think the major problem we have in Kenya that we should address, and we are looking at as a regulator, is for electricity generation, technology is straightforward. We are looking at resource to conversion to end use. And most of the investors are very happy to invest in the end use and the conversion stage because the technologies are proven. We, however, are forgetting about the generation side of the resource. And especially for wind and solar, that's fine. We don't have to invest in it. But for the biomass and the other resources that we are looking at using, we need to shift investors to looking at more of generating the biomass and ensure that we have sustainability along the entire energy value chain, which is right now a problem. And we need to work very hard at getting them involved in the production side of the biomass. And I think these are cross-board in Africa and across the world.
Absolutely. One would assume, Roitesh, that this is an African phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon at this stage.
That's very true, absolutely. I think it's important to not lose sight of where we fit within the broader framework. I think if we look at our major trading partners, where are they heading? Where is the renewable energy space? Where is the sustainability heading in those areas? And I think there's a lot we can learn. I spoke earlier of aligning our domestic incentives, and just last week, or a couple of weeks ago, we had the Costa Rican delegation out in South Africa explaining how their country had achieved a sustainable increase in forestry cover over the country simply by aligning domestic incentives to promote sustainability and promote low carbon growth. And I think it's something that we should really keep in mind as we're taking our rightful place as Africa in the world.
Well, Alishia, I mean, the IRP requires an in excess of 350 billion rand in investment to renewable energy over the next 19 years. That averages out to about 18 billion rand a year. What kind of commitment has the IDC actually made here? And, you know, where we're talking about a bankability of projects, just how do you assess some of the feasibility? What's some of the criteria you put out, on the table when assessing feasibility and bankability?
Maybe just first to comment, the IDC in terms of numbers have committed to invest over the next 5 years 100 billion rand in the whole economy of South Africa. Of that, we earmarked to invest 25 billion rand in the green economy. Now, to quantify that, that includes manufacturing, which is a very important focus area of IDC. We would like to stimulate and support the value chain approach, as was referred to earlier, as well as localization. So just in terms of generation and green industries, for which I'm mainly responsible, excluding manufacturing, we're earmarking just over 22 billion rand in the next 5 years. We believe that we can reach that. I think given the numbers on the table, in excess of 300 billion rand, there's an opportunity to do even more. However, these projects are slow. It takes time to develop. When you refer to feasibilities, very important for us is to look at the resource, especially when you look at wind projects. We want to make sure that there's enough information in place, that we're comfortable with the resource information, and of course the technology that we're going to apply. Many of these projects are profitable at certain PPA rates. Others are marginal, depending on the wind speed. But when you look at the range of renewable energy projects, we want to approach it differently. I think you have to acknowledge and be sensitive to the fact that evaluating a biomass project, evaluating a solar PV versus a solar CSP project, and even developing it, is very different. Each of them are unique. Although you would like to see a project advancing quite quickly through pre-feasibility and feasibility, through its EIA and all the different processes that you need to put in place during those phases, the last thing you want to do is rush a project and trying to fast track a project and not really make sure that you put everything in place until you reach bankability.
Of course, that's from your side. Looking at the applications that come through, past your desk, what kind of appetite are you seeing from investors wanting to partake in this industry? Because for them, it's that commercial viability that has, is key, and we've still got so much outstanding in terms of the regulatory framework. And I go back to that again, because that is going to be, bulk of where that incentive is going to come from.
We've received a number of applications over the last 2 years, especially projects in wind, solar PV. After the announcements of the latest IRP 2010, we've seen an increase in specifically PV. And I think that was really driven from the perspective that government would like to increase the PV consumption in South Africa. However, we do see some developers getting frustrated, getting a bit annoyed and unhappy with the process currently. It costs them money. Every day that we delay the process and do not have clarity in terms of the process, it costs money. If, for example, government require that as part of the RFP they need to have underwritten debt and equity, we as DFIs and commercial banks need to be prepared, resourced properly and ready to be able to serve all those projects, to evaluate all the projects in time. So it put a lot of pressure on us, it put pressure on the developers, but I do still see a lot of activity in that space, a lot of faith that we will reach a point quite soon.